Hi, everybody. I'm going to try and shoot a weekly video that responds to some of the ideas, thoughts that came up in your Greek translations, and then hopefully I can get another video that takes time to respond to some of the comments and observations and things you said in relation to the reading material as well. This is the Greek one, okay? So the Matthew 28:16 through 20 passage. So now you've got your first week translating a passage under your belt. Things are kind of sorting themselves out, I think, for many of you. Many of you are discovering that vocabulary is something you need to polish up on. Others of you are finding out that Greek verb endings or noun endings are areas where you need to revisit some things. So as you know, as you find these things out, take mental notes of that and revisit that as you need to. Um, if you need to get out your paradigms again and your ending charts, uh, do that. I've got a couple on the web page as well that hopefully simplify things, and I'll explain those charts at some point. So let's look at Matthew 28:16 through 20, or at least talk about it a little bit. Um, as you translated, many of you noticed some interesting exegetical issues that came up, and that's the point. That's what we want to be doing, is finding the value of taking a look at the Greek and taking a look at the Greek in a way that's more substantial than just looking up certain words. Um, and so I think many of you landed on that and found that valuable. Um, the first thing in verse 16 where it says the disciples went to the mountain where Jesus had commanded, directed, set aside. There are some different options there, and this is where we have a tendency to want to find a word that is right. And again, as I said last week, let's look for the best word for the context, and that may be one of several. Um, and with this particular one in verse 16, you want to this is the follow-up question will be to ask, okay, well, how does Matthew sort of present Jesus throughout the rest of the gospel? Is Jesus someone who commands and his disciples follow, or does he direct or lead or suggest? What's the general portrayal of Jesus that would help us better understand what the best translation for this tasso verb might be in verse 16? So that would be some of the exegetical stuff that you want to follow up on when you're translating and you come up with issues like this. Another thing would be to, again, do a little self-analysis of why you might lean one way or another, and sort that out as well. Is there a certain perspective or a view of Jesus that you like better than others? We all have one. So, does having Jesus be a commander that orders his disciples around fit with that or not? And that's an important question to ask as well. Moving on, verse 17, there's that issue of that the disciples seeing Jesus worshipped him, and then it said there's two options, but some doubted or but they doubted. Now that Greek article, the hoi, could be translated as some or as they, could go either way. Another thing to keep in mind, though, is that verb in verse 17, distazo, can mean hesitate also. Doesn't have to mean necessarily doubt in the sense of questioning who Jesus is, or doubt in terms of the contrast to faith. It could mean a hesitancy. So is that a possibility here in that passage? A couple of you pointed that out and noticed that, but most of you went with doubted. So take another look at that verb and see what difference that makes. But again, the question is raised: can you worship and hesitate, or worship and have some doubt at the same time? I think a lot of times we think you can't have both, and so it must be that some worshipped, some doubted. But could it be that they worshipped and doubted, or worshipped and had hesitancy at the same time? Again, exegetical stuff that only comes up if you're looking at the Greek. If you're just reading the English, you're not going to see this. And then how much richer is the passage because of that. So moving on, verse 19, the main verb in verse 19 is make disciples, that mathetuseta. Now, some of you saw that it could be disciples, and so that's an interesting issue there too. That would require a little bit more research looking into that particular verb and how it's typically understood. Is it be disciples or make disciples? And I'm not going to answer that for you, but that's something that you'd have to look at. But either way, in verse 19, that verb, mathetuseta, that's the main verb, and it's a command that Jesus gives. Everything else around that is circumstantial participles that relate to the main verb. So, make disciples as you're going along, poruthentis. Make disciples, baptizing them, teaching them. Either way, verse 19, the main verb that's driving what Jesus says is make disciples or be disciples, however you want to translate that. And again, that was just another important part of the passage there. Moving on to verse 20. Behold, I am with you always, all the time. Now in Greek, almost all of you noted that it's literally all the days. And some of you pointed out that's a little different than always. All the days gives a little bit a different nuance to the point, and I think that's important, especially in our context today, where the word always can be thrown around pretty lightly. Jesus is saying, "I'm with you all the days." And that might be important to do a little intertextual connection. Remember the Sermon on the Mount, the Lord's Prayer. Give us today our daily bread. At the end of the Gospel, I am with you all the days. There's an importance about the day, daily life, daily living that is coming to the surface here. A final point, verse 20, I am with you. Now, how do we take that? Is that a comfort and a hope? Could be. Or is that a sort of way of Jesus saying, I am with you, i.e., if the world is going to see me, it's going to be through you, the disciples. And that's worth thinking about in terms of what Jesus is saying here. Jesus might not just be saying, I'm with you, so be comforted. He might be saying, I'm with you, so if you don't carry out the mission, no one's going to see who I am. No one's going to see the kingdom of heaven on earth because I'm with you. I'm not somewhere else. And that's worth considering because that seems to be a theme throughout Matthew's gospel, this with you language. At the beginning of Matthew's gospel, which we will read soon, Jesus, it's said in Matthew 1:21, the passage that you're reading for this week, interesting connection, Jesus is God with us. God's presence is in Jesus. Now at the end of the gospel, Jesus says, I am with you all. Jesus' presence, who was God's presence on earth, that presence is now with us. And that's more than just a nice comfort and a hope. That's saying something quite significant about where is God's presence, where is Jesus' presence to be found in this world with us. And so that's worth thinking about in terms of what is Jesus saying here, and how does that connect then with the command he's giving to the disciples. So that's Matthew 28:16 through 20. Just a little bit talking through some stuff. Hopefully, it's helpful as we continue to think through these passages and exegete them. Keep up with the Greek, and we will talk soon, I'm sure.